Hi everyone, welcome back. So we're going to continue on now with our lip sync animation process. As you can see here, I've already animated the lip sync as I've gone through in the previous videos. I've added in a little blink at the end there. And in this video, what we're going to do is go through the process for adding some lighting to the scene and then rendering the sequence out. In the next video, we'll just do a short one on how to combine your audio with your rendered frames and then render out the final video file. So let's jump in and get on with adding some lighting to this scene. So the first thing we're going to do is pop up to the Create menu, and I'm going to go down to Lights, and I'm going to select some lights down here. Now, for this, it doesn't really matter what you do. The lighting is kind of up to you. I'll just show you a couple of different options for the lighting, and you can basically experiment and come up with a nice look that you're happy with. So at a basic level, we can use something like a directional light. So with a directional light, basically what we can do is just grab it and move it off to the side here. When you create the light, it'll always land in the middle of the grid, and that's probably going to be inside the character's head. So all you need to do is just switch the move tool on and then just move it across. Just make sure you don't deselect anything before you move it. A directional light really just works off rotation, so basically all we need to do is just rotate it around in a way that the arrows are going to be pointing towards the character's head, or sort of in that direction, angled towards the head, so something like that. It doesn't matter where you place this particular light type. Directional lights completely ignore position, and they work purely off the angle that the light is pointing. So this angle here will give me the exact same result as if the light was over here, for example. Whereas if I turn the light source around like this and have the light pointing towards the back of the character's head, the front of his face will be completely shadowed, and the illumination will basically be only around the back. So we do need to make sure that a directional light is going to be pointing towards the character's face for the most part. Now you can add multiple lights in if you want, and you could have, for example, one light pointing towards this side of his face and another light pointing towards that side of his face, and then change maybe the colors on them or the intensity, so you get like a really bright illumination here, and sort of this side is a little bit more in shadow. You can do that as well, it's up to you. This little light bulb button here at the top of the viewport is use all lights. Normally the key 7 on the keyboard will activate that. You can see that there. What this is going to do is give you a vague idea of the angle the light is pointing at. It's not going to give you it's not really going to display the full quality of the light in the viewport that you'll get in your render. So it's really just to give you a bit more of a visual idea of the angle of the light source. So you can see if I angle the light around like this, so it's pointing at the back of his head, his whole face goes black. So you do need to make sure the directional lights are pointing in the correct direction. So normally what I do is like to rotate the arrows so they're pointing down a little bit, and then also have them pointing towards the character's face. So, you know, we can kind of shadow one side of his face by angling it that way, or we can flip it around the other way and have it coming in from this side. Okay, but what you do with the lighting is up to you. All of the lights have shadows switched on by default, and you can turn them on and off here where it says use ray trace shadows. You can just change that to off. Now you can type in 0 to do that, and a 1 to switch them back on. Okay, that way if you've got multiple lights in your scene, you can set them up so only the main light or one of the lights cast shadows. That way you're not getting shadows kind of all over the place. Okay, now you can also change the color of the lights as well if you like. If you go into the attribute editor here and you've got your light selected, you've got a color swatch there. That's pretty easy. And the intensity value here is how bright the light is. I probably wouldn't put them over a value of 1, but if you want a dimmer light, you can reduce the value just there. So something along those lines would be fine. That's completely up to you. Now, for those of you that want to do something a little bit more with your lighting, you can play around with multiple lights, as I was saying. I'm going to remove this light by hitting delete, and I'll show you another option. So if I pop up to create lights, volume light, okay, a volume light basically is an area that lighting appears. So essentially, the majority of the lighting for this area light is going to be within this sphere. The light source itself is here in the middle, this little dot, and basically it'll illuminate out to the edge of this sphere. Now on screen, you can see here it's actually displaying some light outside of the sphere. Okay, but what I'm going to do is a quick test render for this, and we'll actually have a look at what it's doing. So that's the test render, and you can see that the whole thing is completely black. And that's because the character is not inside this sphere, or the sphere isn't big enough to contain the character. If I click on the alpha channel button just here, you can see that the head is actually there, like the character is there, but there's not enough illumination on it, so we can't actually see him in the render, and that's why basically the render is black. Now if I take this volume light and I scale it up using the scale tool, so that it's big enough to partially include the character, and I do another render there, we should now start to see a little bit of the character's face. So these are great for things like campfires and candles and things like that, where they have a limited range. So if I grab this light and I scale it quite a fair way up, okay, basically the way that we can kind of view this is if an object is here right in the middle of the area light, or sorry, the volume light. This is that's like 100% intensity. Like this value here, 1, that's like 100%. Okay, so in the middle, the intensity is 1. At the edge of the circle, or just outside the edge, the intensity is 0. So if I've got him here and he's halfway between the two, then the intensity here is about 0.5. So we can kind of set fall-offs on the light sources like this. So we start to get this kind of effect. Okay. Now, the rotation of this light means absolutely nothing because it's basically spherical. The scale, as you see, as you've seen, can impact the resulting light, but the position also will dictate, the angle that the light's coming in at. So, if I place this up here, for example, the light is going to come down from an angle. Okay, so there's more light sort of at the top of his head than there is down here in this case. You can see all the shadows are under his eyebrows. Okay, so the position and the scale of these volume lights is quite important. So if you're going to play around with these a little bit, just keep that in mind. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to place one of these behind him like this. And what that hopefully will do is add a little bit of an edge of light just here in the background. And I'm then going to duplicate the light. So I'm going to hit Control D or Command D on a Mac. And I'm going to bring, and you can see there that basically makes this twice as bright because there's now 2 lights there. And the brightness is sort of additive. So if you've got 2 lights in the same spot doing the same thing, and their intensity is a value of 1 each, collectively their intensity is a value of 2. So basically it's twice as bright now. Now if I move this over to here and place it sort of just in front of him, like this, okay, what we can start getting is this sort of like a bright highlight over here and sort of this main light here. Now I can bring this forward a little bit, this one at the back. So if I just bring that forward, you'll note that the further forward this comes, the lighter this kind of strip of shadow down his face gets. Notice that he's actually in the area that's overlapping the 2 lights as well. So he's going to take lighting from here and also from here. Now what we can do with these is change their colors. So for example, this rear light, what I might do is change that to a blue color, like this. And I might back that off a little bit. So we've got sort of this purpley blue color. And then on this one, I could change this to red, for example. And then what we can do is sort of adjust the positions and so on. So you could actually kind of get like a weird lighting effect that's a bit like this. And if I do a test render of that, we can kind of see the results there. So you can see here we're starting to get something that's a bit more atmospheric. So what you do with the lighting is up to you, but have a bit of a play around with it and see if you can come up with a nice sort of effect. Now in this situation, obviously it's the render is really dark, you know, it's very, very dark. So in this situation, what I might do, if I'm using these as sort of my effects lights, for example, so I've got sort of one that's sort of more like a rim light that's illuminating sort of the back, and then this one's sort of, you know, in front. What I might do is drop the intensity of this one down a little bit. So, you know, I might drop this down to say 0.6, so it's a bit darker. And then I can add a third light in that's sort of pointing towards his face and doing the normal illumination. So what I could do is go create lights and then maybe drop in like a point light, for example. And if I move this out, that's going to return, because this is white light, okay, default setting, it's going to give me sort of more of that normal illumination back that I had before. So if I kind of place this up a little bit and sort of a bit more in front of him, okay, what I should be getting now is something that's a little bit more normal, okay? But you can still see I'm still getting a bit of a red tinge here, and I'm still getting a bit of a blue tinge here. So I can then just go through and start to adjust the positions of those other lights, and maybe, you know, change their intensities and so on. So for example, if I crank the intensity of this back up a bit, and maybe if I, you know, maybe make this maybe an intensity of about 2, something like that, I can start to get a bit more of a an effect going. And this is just stuff that I'm making up as I go along. I'm just playing around with the light sources. So you can see there I'm now starting to get this sort of purple tinge down this side and a red tinge over here. So, you know, I might be sort of happy with that. It's a bit of a stylized lighting. So as I said, completely up to you how you do this. Okay, there's sort of no right or wrong way, but you do want to be able to see the character's face because they're talking. So you do need to kind of have your lighting set up in a way that's going to make the render look good rather than taking away from it. You know, if your character's face is completely shadowed, then you can't really see the character's performance. You know, but if you've got like one light that's sort of off to the side, for instance, so, you know, like if I take out this rear light, this purple one, and maybe even if I, you know, maybe drop the intensity of this right down, this point light, you know, maybe down to about 0.2, and if I do a render on that, let me just zoom in a little bit here. If I do a test render on that, I should get a really sort of heavy red on this side. Now, this point light's probably a little bit too far in front of the character, so, you know, if I sort of swing this around to here a little bit more, so I'm going to get a little bit of illumination on the side there. Actually, I'm going to sort of too far out, but you can kind of see the effect that that's having. I'm getting this really sort of red glow on this side, and then a bit of shadow in the middle, and then the normal illumination on this side. So, you know, have a play around with your lighting. It's completely up to you what you do with it. Okay, for me, just for this example, to make it really nice and easy to kind of see what I've got, I'm just going to do just a standard directional light that's sort of pointing sort of down at an angle. Okay, that's going to make it easier for you guys to see my renders when I'm explaining the other processes. All right, so what I want to do really quickly is just set up my render settings. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure we've got our project folder set, and you should be doing that every time you open the software up before you load your files. So once again, that's basically just going to the File menu, going to Set Project, and selecting your project folder that you're working from. So for example, for me, it's this LipSync folder just here. Okay, and that's got all of our you know, subfolders in it. So just go LipSync and set. Now the reason we have to do that is when this software exports the rendered files, it's going to place them in the images folder inside our project folder. If you haven't set your project folder, those files could go anywhere. You know, they might go into somebody, if you're using a shared computer at work or at school, your renders might end up in somebody else's folder, for example. So, and you don't want to do that. So set your project folders. we're going to go into the render settings up here. So this little button just here, and that's going to pop open our render panel, render settings panel. We want to render using Mental Ray just here. Okay. Now, if that's not there, if Mental Ray is not in the list, you'll need to come up to Windows menu, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you'll need to scroll down and look for the Maya to Mental Ray just here, Maya to MR. That'll say .bundle on a Mac, and on the PC it's .mll. Just make sure they're both loaded, and then that'll show up in the list. You can select it. So in here at the top, it's got path, and this is showing us where it's going to export our render to. And you can see that this is my file path into my images folder in my project folder just here. So what we need to do is set a name. So I'm just going to call this LS for lip sync, and then underscore frame. Okay, and then put an underscore at the end. Now, notice up here nothing has changed. I need to press enter when I type something in. What that's going to do is lock it in. So you can see now that name is showing up here. Image format, what I want to do is set this to, for this we can just use a JPEG. That's easy enough. Compression quality, we'll just crank that up to maximum, so we're going to get a reasonable image. The frame animation extension needs to be not single frame. If you leave it on this, it will just render frame 1 and then stop. And that catches a lot of people out. You need to change this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is put it to name. In this case, because I've put an underscore at the end, I'm just going to go name number extension. If you put name underscore number, because you've already put an underscore in here, you'll have 2 underscores, which you don't need. So you can use one of either of those two. So I'm just going to do that. The reason we don't just put name is, depending on the computer you're using, the Macintosh systems used to do this all the time. They would kind of ignore the extension, and the software on a Mac wouldn't put the extension in automatically. So if you didn't have this option and you just went with this, the computer wouldn't actually kind of save the file as a JPEG. It would save it as like a default file, and then you'd have to go in and add the extension manually into each file name afterwards for the for say Premiere or After Effects to actually understand what file it was and import it. So I always use one that's got an extension tag on the end. Okay, frame padding. Okay, so this is the number of digits you've got in your biggest or your last file frame, I should say. So if your animation goes up to frame 100, that would have a 1, a 0, and a 0 in it, which is 3 digits. 1, 0, 0 is 3, so you'd set that to 3. In my situation, my animation goes up to frame 35, so that's 2 digits, a 3 and a 5. So my frame padding is going to be 2, like that. Now it's okay if you go over, all right. All that's going to do is make your file names longer because you'll have more zeros in the number. If you go under, that's where you get the problem that, for example, After Effects won't load your files in the actual order that they're supposed to be in. It'll kind of scramble them up. So frame padding is all about keeping your files in the right order. So this number needs to be the number of digits in your final frame. Okay, start frame, pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to start at frame, for this I'm going to start at frame 0. Okay, and the reason for that is that in After Effects, my timeline's going to start at frame 0. Okay, end frame is going to be, for me, 35. Don't forget, you don't have to set your end frame to be the end of where your audio is. You can see here my audio stops on 27, but I'm going to just render a few extra frames so there's a bit more of a gap. Everything else here you can leave. We're going to scroll down. The renderable camera, that's the viewport we're going to render out of. I'm just going to render from perspective, so I just need to make sure that that's perspective. If you've added a new camera into your scene that you're going to use, you need to make sure that it's set to that camera. Presets, HD 720 is what we're going to render at, which is 1280 by 720 pixels. And you can see that there. Really, there's very little else we need to do here. If you come down to the render options right down the bottom, if you want, you can turn off enable default light. it's really not going to make too much of a difference for this, but there'll be some instances when you're doing more complicated scenes where you'd need to turn that off, and it can be a good habit. If you're adding lights into your scene, you can switch that one off. Okay, quality. This I'm going to set to a value of 1. Anything over 1 for this kind of little learning project is going to be overkill. It's not really going to improve your images as much. What it will do is make the render take longer to do. So don't crank this up to like 2 or 5 or 10 or anything like that. It's just going to make your render longer, and it won't improve the quality very much, if at all. Okay, my filtering down here, I'm going to set the filter to Mitchell. Okay, Gauss will blur the image slightly, which I don't want. And if I pop down to legacy options down here and scroll down, what I want to do is turn final gathering on. What that's going to do is kind of make the shadows a little bit more subtle, and it's also going to help boost the lighting from the background color into the overall lighting of the scene. Currently, as you guys have seen, my background color is black. I'm going to change that in a minute to make everything a bit more bright. You can, if you want, increase the secondary diffuse bounces just here to maybe a value of 1 or 2. I wouldn't go over that. You wouldn't really need it, but this can sort of help kind of make the shadows even more subtle. Okay. There's probably not much else we need to do. That's about it as far as the render settings are concerned. So all you need to do is just double check the settings up at this top part here on the Common tab, and just make sure it's going to go to the correct folder, which is images here in the project folder. Make sure that you've got all your frame numbers in, and that your frame file names kind of make sense. And you've also got your image size here. Okay, so I'm going to close that off, and then I'm going to save my scene. So you can just press the Save Scene button just here, or go File, Save. And I'll just hit Continue and Continue. Alright, so there's 2 more things that I want to do. The first thing I want to do is I want to change my background color. So I'm going to click on this button just here, which is Camera Attributes. So that's the settings for this viewport perspective. So if I click that, you should get this kind of pop open, and it'll have perspective shape. Just scroll down and go to Environment, and you can change your background color here. I'm going to change it to something a bit neutral, so I don't want it to be too saturated. So I'm going to bring this in like this, and maybe make it sort of like a pale green color, perhaps like a gray green. Okay, it's up to you guys. You can make it like a white color, or a light color, light gray or something like that. That's sort of up to you. Try not to make it too dark though, because that always ends up kind of, if you don't want it to be sort of like dark and eerie, change it to a light color. If you want it to be dark and eerie, then obviously, yeah, you can keep it sort of very dark. All right. So the last thing I need to do is basically make sure I've got the camera in the correct spot. Now, this viewport doesn't represent the entire render area, okay? A part of this viewport does. So what I need to do is switch on the resolution gate just here. It's this little blue dot. It puts this green box up. That's the actual area that it'll render, so inside the box. So what I need to do, this character is designed to sort of sit off the bottom of the image like this. We don't want it to sort of look like a decapitated head. So we need to kind of hang the neck section of the model down out of the shot like this. Okay, otherwise you can kind of position it however you want. Like if you want a profile talking, it's a bit weird, but you can have like a 3/4 view like this. Okay, or you can have maybe a shot where it's sort of looking down a little bit more like that, or maybe up like this. It's up to you how you place it. For most scenes I wouldn't have the character pointing straight at the camera like this. It's a bit boring. So I'd maybe just stick it a little bit on the side. Now, if you're going to have a sort of a slightly 3/4 view like this, like a slightly sideways shot, move the character off to just off center like this, in the direction that like if he's facing this way, then move him in the opposite direction like this. If he's this way around, then move him in this side like that. It sort of just has a bit more of a naturalistic feel as far as your composition is concerned. If you do this, it sort of looks a bit weird, where he's got like a big gap behind him. Okay, so it's sort of up to you where you place it, but yeah, just hang the bottom of the character off the screen and then just place this in like this. So basically what we're going to be seeing is something like this.
Hi there.
Okay, I might just tweak him around a bit so I can see a bit more of that ear. Alright, so once I've got to this point, I'm ready to render. So I'm just going to save the file again, like this. Okay, and all of my render settings are now saved with the file. So if I need to now take this file and put it on a different computer, I can do that, and all I have to do is open the file. I don't need to change any of the settings anymore because they're already saved, and I can just do my render. Okay, so what we do is we come across to rendering just here, and we've got this batch render button just here, and we just click that. Down the bottom, it's going to save the file as well. It does like a temporary export of the file, and at the bottom of the screen down here, you'll see it saying rendering with Mental Ray. This will start a little kind of percentage completed thing. There it goes. So in the folder, it's telling me which file it's rendering. Sorry, not in the folder, in the brackets, it's telling me which file it's rendering. And this is the percentage of that file. Keep in mind, the percentage is not of the entire render of the whole animation. It's just of that file, okay? So in this case, it's rendering like frame 4. It's going to move on to frame 5 in a second. Okay, it's not the whole render. So don't like press escape or turn the software off if you see this number go to 100. That just means it's just rendered one image. Okay, so while it's doing this, you can go off and have a cup of tea or go and have a nap or whatever you're doing. If you're at school, obviously you could, you know, do a bit of work on something else while you're waiting. My sequence is really short. It's only 35 frames. You guys might be doing 100, 200 frames, something like that, depending on the audio that you've selected. Now, for the second part, or the next stage, we will need to know the frame that your audio file starts on in Maya. Mine just, I just imported mine straight out. I didn't change the starting position of the audio, so mine is 0. For anybody that's put a delay in or an offset for the audio, so the audio might start at, say, frame 25, you need to know what that number is. So if I right click in the timeline and go to sound and then down to my sound file options, okay, if I've changed this offset number to make the audio start later on down the timeline, I need to know what that number is for the next stage of the process. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here rendering. I've got about another 15 frames or so to go. In the next video, I'll have my frames all rendered out, and we're going to, for me, I'm going to put it in After Effects and then combine the audio with the rendered frames in there. Okay, so just make sure you take a note of this before you get to After Effects or Premiere or whatever. Just make a note of that. Okay guys, I'll see you again soon.